Okay, so welcome everyone. It's almost 10 after, so we're going to start. We have a small audience in terms of citizens, but we definitely have a larger audience of people interested in all things budget. So we're going to stick to the agenda anyway. For the board members, this is our first presentation from staff as well. It's not a decision-making meeting, so I'm calling to order, and I'm only going to be asking people to declare conflict of interest if there are any in relation to the budget, so that we get into the habit of thinking of whether or not there is for later on in the process. So I'll call to order and ask if there are in fact any conflicts of interest in relation to the police services budget. Seeing none, we will start then. So first of all, welcome. We have a small but very dedicated office in terms of creating a more transparent budget process, and this is really our first take at it. As the members of the public know, we generally have this meeting and the first few meetings at this point in the process. We're still upstairs. This is the first time we've come downstairs, and so we're clearly starting small, but hopefully we'll go on from here. The formal members of the budget committee are myself, Chief Saunders. There are deputy chiefs and the CAO in attendance, but myself and Marie Mulliner, my fellow board member, are the formal members of the budget committee. But as you know, all members of the Police Services Board are welcome at all the budget committee meetings, and Mr. Jeffers is here for his first look at the presentation as well. This is part of the Way Forward initiative in a way. The budget obviously will have a lot of transformation within it, and starting this year, particularly in the next year. And so we see this very much as part of the whole process of changing culture and getting to a budget that is easy to understand for community members. For the first time, we have posted a web page in a slightly more user-friendly format. Tonight's questions may improve upon that. We have a dedicated unit to making it more and more transparent. But it is available already if you haven't had a look at it already on the board's website. Some of the more visual parts of the budget page are before us in large format, and we'll get into those a little more. This is actually an information session. We're holding this in advance of what is the first formal public meeting of the board with regard to budget. So tonight will be an informal meeting in that you won't have to make a deputation, you can ask questions. And that is a new and hopefully very welcome step in the budget process. So we'll be looking at those later. Community will have more opportunity to make deputations. For tonight's format, there are a few things that we'd like people to keep in mind. We're going to go through the whole presentation. First, Cindy's going to present some, and then Mr. Veneziano. We're going to go through the whole presentation. So if you want to make notes, because we have a small audience, we know this. If you want to make a note of your questions, it's not going to be so formal that I will then read your questions aloud. Make a note of the questions, but then we will be asking you to pose those questions yourselves when we get to the Q&A portion. I think we do have question cards if you need those for note taking, and we can be informal about how long you have for questions because we have a small audience. As it says in my notes, this process depends largely on how many people attend. You're in luck tonight, Chris and Miguel. So I'm gonna pass it over to Cindy Grant now to begin the presentation. When we get through the presentation, when we get to the Q&A portion, as you can see, we have people here that are very representative of the various units. And indeed, behind you, Chief Saunders, deputy chiefs. So we can do a deep dive into some of the things you may have questions about. So I'm going to hand it over to you now, Cindy, to present, and I gather it's going to be up there and there.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
There we go. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2018 budget review process. Our goal this year is to be more open, transparent, and accountable. So we're sharing information with you on our 2018 budget request, and we're sharing that information earlier. But before we actually get into the numbers, we want to do a bit of a budget primer. We want to share with you the 10 things that you need to know to understand our budget better. The first thing that you need to know is the budget itself is important, but what's more important is what the budget buys. Our mission is community safety, and we achieve this mission with 3 goals. Be where the public needs the service the most, embrace partnerships to create safe communities, and focus on the complex needs of a large city. And our budget supports this mission and these strategic goals. The second thing that you should note is that we have a modernization plan. And this plan is leading to big changes in the way that we deliver service. It's also helping us to move towards a more affordable and sustainable budget. And as we move forward with the implementation of the Transformational Task Force recommendations, the savings and investments are being built into our budget. The third thing that you should know is that the budget is built on solid financial principles and a lot of hard work. When developing our budget, we make sure that there's sufficient funds to execute our plans. But there are also hard decisions that we're making to ensure that the budget is low enough to be affordable, but also adequate enough to sustain our operations. And we try to do this in an open and transparent way. This slide shows you how extensive the process is for budget development. It starts at the unit level, where we develop budgets unit by unit, account by account. It then goes through extensive internal reviews through the command. We also have extensive reviews with the City Financial Planning Division, and then on to the Board Budget Committee and the Board approval. After that, we go to the City Budget Committee and then ultimately to Council. The fourth thing you should know is that there's 2 types of budgets. There's an operating budget, and this funds day-to-day activities. If you liken this to what would happen in your household, it would be things like rent and utilities and food. The other kind of budget is a capital budget, and this is for longer-term investments. You could liken this to a purchase of your new car, or an appliance, or maybe the renovation of your house. For the Toronto Police Service, operating expenses are things like wages, benefits, and overtime for our staff. But did you know that this actually represents 88% of our budget? We're doing a lot to ensure that that 88% is bringing value for your money. We're making sure that not only are people in the right place at the right time, but we're also decreasing response to non-essential calls and providing service through new customer service options. And this equals value for your dollar. The other 12% of the operating costs are spent on things like gas and parts to keep our cars on the road, maintenance to keep our computers going, reserves. We make contributions to reserves so that we will have the funds to make the big purchases to prevent big swings in our budget. And we also have to pay for hydro to keep the lights on. Capital expenses at TPS are things like land or renovation or construction of new police facilities. major technology projects, and the replacement of our fleet of vehicles. But now that you know what our budget is spent on, you should know how we actually fund those purchases. Well, for the operating budget, we fund this largely through property taxes. Approximately 88% of our budget is funded that way. We also take funds from those reserves that we had contributed to. We have user fees, such as criminal reference checks. We also get provincial grants. But what is our budget not funded through? It's not funded through parking tickets or traffic tickets, as these go directly to the city and the province. Where did the capital funds come from? These are different sources. They come from borrowing money, from reserves again, and also from development charges, which are fees charged to land development projects to help pay for costs of services required for the new development. We also want you to know that the biggest cost driver for our budget is wages. As a result of wage contracts negotiated between the board and the association and the senior officer organization, our wages go up. And this translates to an increased budget year over year. But without this cost driver, if you look at the bar graph and you see the line, our budget would actually be going down. The reason is because of other costs. We have found ways, despite inflation and other pressures, to reduce these other costs by millions of dollars. You should also know that there are opportunities to become involved, as you are today. And these opportunities are much earlier than they used to be. Today, you can engage, ask questions. A week ago, we provided information to you. That information isn't usually available to the public until just before the board meeting, where the board deliberates the budget. After we have the budget committee and the board meeting, there's also opportunities at the city to do your due diligence on the budget. The last thing that you need to know is that there's a lot more information available on our budget. And this can be found on our website. And I know some of you have already looked at our website, but I'm going to take a very brief look at the website to show you what's available. There you go. Now this is going to be... Okay. So our website is actually pretty user-friendly. If you look on the left-hand side of the website, that's where you will find all of the reports. And we have an operating budget program breakdown. This is usually what we provide, but in a different format. The first thing that you actually need to look at is this file. If you just click on it, this tells you how to read our budget reports. All of the terms are defined, all of the assumptions are noted, and you can see exactly what you should be looking at when you look at our reports. So once you've had an opportunity to look at that, you can look at our reports. And there's two different formats that you can look at our reports in. You can either go to the organizational chart and you can click on one of the boxes. The information in the organizational chart is only included at the high levels, at the command levels and district levels. But if you want to know about every unit in the Toronto Police Service, you would open this file right here. If, for instance, you wanted to look at the traffic services unit, by looking at the organizational chart, you can see which command area it's under. I know that it's under Specialized Operations Command. I can look there. Or we've also made it more convenient for you to look at everything in one file by clicking on the all files zipped into one. So if we open the Specialized Operations Command, let me just make it a little bit bigger. You'll see across these tabs all of the units within Specialized Operations Command. And so if you move to the right, scroll over, there's traffic services. And that's, you can have a look at that yourself. So going back to the website, there's also information, the infographics that you see on the boards at the side. We have a capital spreadsheet that you can look at that shows all of our capital projects. And there's also the budget review process. There is a link to open data, which will show you the statistics. This is our new public safety data portal created by the Business Intelligence Unit. And finally, there's a line-by-line request of our budget. If you open that, what you will see is a list of all of our budgets for all of our accounts by category: salaries, premium pay, benefits, etc. Okay, so that's pretty much all of what you can find on our website. We will be adding information as we go through the meetings to update the information, so please check our website occasionally. So that's the budget basics, and I'm going to now turn it over to Tony to take you through the numbers. Okay. All right, where do you want this?
That's good. Take this with you before. That's good. Good evening, colleagues, board members, members of the public. So as Cindy said, I'm going to put together or put some numbers to some of the things that, that Cindy talked about. And what I'm going to cover is our 2018 operating budget request, and this is preliminary, our 2018 to 27 capital program, the parking enforcement budget, as well as the 2018 preliminary operating budget request for the board that Joanne Campbell is going to present. So the city set in June of this year basically directed that all city divisions, agencies, boards, and commission basically come in at a flat line budget over 2017, a 0% increase, and I'm pleased to report that we've actually achieved a 0% increase and have met the city's target. So basically this is the second year in a row that we've done that, and so we've had to balance the need to make certain investments that will facilitate the modernization initiative and the way forward with the fiscal challenges that the city and the service is facing. One of the principles of the Way Forward report was that we be affordable and sustainable. So certainly there is a need to provide public safety services. The nature of those services are changing as national security and cybercrime becomes more prevalent. But we have to do that. We can't just ignore the fact that there's unlimited money. We have to be able to do that within an envelope, and the city has set that envelope at a 0% increase over 2017, and this year we've been able to achieve that. So what does affordable and sustainable mean? It's basically providing value, getting the best value for the buck, controlling costs, and basically making sure that every single dollar that we spend facilitates community safety. It means working continuously to improve public access to services and the provision of those services. It means aligning our budget to our strategy and focusing on the right priorities. And the way forward is essentially our three-year budget, our three-year strategic plan. And so we have to align our services and the way that we change those services to that plan, and then provide the money to actually support and make those services happen. And finally, on the capital side, we want to make sure we could invest in a lot of different capital programs, but again, we have a zero target that targets that the city expects us to meet, and so we have to make sure that we're making the right capital investments that enable the longer-term strategy of the service. So again, Frank Bergen, I think, is here, and his team, as well as many people from around the service, have been very busy moving the way forward. And so in 2017, we accomplished, I think, quite a lot. We've continued our moratorium on hiring and promotions, and that basically allows us to right-size the organization, change the organization without investing in positions that quite frankly, we may not need as part of the reorganization. We've returned a couple of facilities to the city. They're worth about $5 million, and we've actually saved about $250,000 in operating costs as a result of that. We've disbanded the transit patrol unit and basically returned those officers to the front line. We've disbanded TAVIS, and again, those existing members have been deployed to other service priorities. And we started looking at a new district model. In 2018, we're transitioning lifeguards and the school crossing guard programs to the city. And this is, again, one of the principles of the TTF was to focus on core policing services. Those two programs are not core policing services, and the city is best able to provide those programs. We're looking at, one of the things that came out of the TTF was alternative service delivery models and options for courts and parking enforcement. And so rather than us make that call, we've actually talked to the city, and they now are doing an arm's length review using an outside consultant to basically look at the viability of actually outsourcing those programs. Does it make sense or does it make sense? We've transformed, or will be transforming, the human resource function so that it's a modern, a professional function that actually supports the service and the initiatives in the TTF. I talked about the district model that will continue into 2018. We're also looking and doing a proof of concept on the connected officer. This is in making sure that our officers on the street, whether they're on a horse, on a bike, in a car, or on foot, actually have the technology and the information for them to do their jobs effectively. And we're also looking at technology enforcement to improve public safety. Okay, so this chart just shows where we started. We started with our approved budget, which was 1005.7. Then the city expects us and directs us to basically prepare what they call a base budget. And that base budget includes collective agreement increases. It assumes that we're going to be funded at the same level of staff that we had in 2017, and it covers other budgetary pressures. So that caused a pressure of about $40 million over 2017. We then began our review process with the chief and the command and the various units across the service, and mainly through the hiring moratorium on both the civilian and uniform side, as well as other reductions that we made, we got our budget request down to by about $23 million, or $14.6 million above 0%. And so the way we've got it down to 0% is basically we had monies that we were going to contribute to the modernization reserve out of our checking account, the operating budget. We decided that we were going to try to do that out of surplus, so we eliminated that. We had some transformational initiatives that we are now hoping to fund through the provincial grants or the modernization reserve. And we have $7.6 million in what we call an unallocated reduction. And this is reductions that we are currently looking at, or revenues that we're currently looking at, and just needing more information to make sure that we confirm that we're actually going to be able to make the reduction or get the revenue. That brings us then down to the 0% that we're going to be moving forward to the Board Budget Committee on October 5th. This is what it looks like on a high level, and so you can see the bulk of the reduction, almost $24 million, and if you add the benefits and premium pay, it's actually about a $25 million reduction. There's been some increases in other equipment. That is mainly the result of us having to maintain and replace an ever-increasing IT equipment fleet. And so you can see that through that whole process, we get down to what our preliminary request is, which is 0%. So in terms of where the budget comes from, as Cindy indicated, 88% comes from the property taxpayers, and the remainder comes from either provincial grants, user fees, or reserve funds. In terms of where it goes, we are a service-oriented organization, so the bulk of that goes to actually pay the people who provide those services, again about 88%, and the rest is for non-salary expenditures, which I'll talk about later. What this chart shows, and it goes back to 2010, is, and the dark line is our approved establishment. That's positions that we're approved for. And the the green or whatever that is, color, light green line, is basically the actual number of officers that we actually have on the street. And so you can see that from 2010, our approved establishment and the actual officers on the street was pretty well right on. We budgeted to our approved establishment. In 2014, we civilianized about 156 positions. And so our uniform establishment went down by that number to 5448, and our civilian establishment went up by the same amount. But now you start seeing some gray between the dark line and the green bars. And so we're predicting that by 2020, actually by the end of 2019, we're going to be at around 4750. The difference between officers on the street and the actual approved establishment, when you take out the 156 positions that we civilianized, so we're still paying somebody, we didn't reduce our complement, is about 700 positions. This chart basically shows our uniform development strategy. So you can see in 2017, there are no yellow bubbles, so to speak, or yellow bars, because we didn't hire anybody. We are going to be starting the process in 2017 in December. We have a class of 20, and then we'll have classes of 30 and 30. And so in 2018, we're going to be losing probably 150 to 160 officers, and we're going to supplement that with about 50 officers through the recruitment classes, and that will continue into 2019. So a couple of things. Our average deployment, because people leave through the years, for 2017 was 5,038. By the end of this year, we're probably going to be in and around 4920, because the number up there is probably in August. In 2018, our average deployment will go down to 4870, and by the end of the year, we're going to be around 4840. And then in 2019, our average deployment will be 4779. And as you can see, by the end of 2019, we'll be very close to 4750. So this is basically, we don't budget to, on the previous chart, we don't budget to the dark line. We budget to who we have to pay, how many paychecks we have to issue every 2 weeks. On the civilian side of the house, you'll see we started with 1,894 in 2006, I guess, and that increased, and most of that increase was due to an increase in courts rooms that required us to hire another 100 court officers, and that was in 2007, 2008. And then the civilianization, and you'll see in 2014 it bumps up by 156 positions. So again, the dark line is the approved establishment on the civilian side. The bars are the actual people we have in chairs. One thing I want to clear up with civilians, because people think they're just administrative support people. In a police service, civilians are communication operators, so they're the 911, they're court officers, they're IT technical people, they're fleet people. So they're not your typical administrative. Only about 10% of our civilian actually are accounting, payroll, HR type of support functions. You'll see again that the gap between the green and the dark line has actually increased. And so we've got about 350 vacancies right now on the civilian side, which is about a 16% vacancy rate. So it's very high. Here's our budget breakdown. So again, the salaries and benefits we talked about. The other is comprised basically of two things. $47 million in contributions that we make from our operating budget, the checking account, into reserves, which are our savings account, and the remainder, about $86 million, is for other types of expenses. And those other types of expenses include city charges to us to clean our buildings and to keep our lights on, gasoline for our cars, the need to maintain and support our computer equipment, which continues to grow as we use technology more, clothing for uniform officers. So those are all types of expenses. So when people say, can you reduce your budget more? If you assume that we're budgeting to a number that's going down on the uniform and civilian side, you continue to have to make contributions to the savings account for reserves, you've basically got about $90 million to play with. And that $90 million puts uniforms on our people, gas in our cars, and make sure that our facilities are clean and we can actually see when we're working. Here's the reserve contribution. This is the 47.3, and you can see that insurance and the is $10 million. Sick break gratuity, central sick bank, healthcare spending, those are all part of collective agreement provisions that we have obligations to pay and to ensure that we meet our requirements. The rest are for the replacement of our vehicles and computer equipment. So, if we didn't have to pay collective agreement increases, which is not very realistic, but if we didn't, if you look at this chart, the light blue shows our budget increase, and it goes from $752 million to $1.5 billion. The yellow line actually shows what it would have been had we had 0% increases over that period of time. The total, the gap between the yellow line and the top of the blue line is $272 million. But what I really want to show is, and I think Cindy pointed out as well, is that our budget is below where we were in 2006. We still had to pay collective agreements. So we've actually gone down on the non-salary things. We've actually reduced the non-salary, the other expenses, and basically have deferred contributions to actually meet certain board and city targets. Capital. Our gross capital budget is about $523 million. We pay and fund about $283 million out of our savings accounts, our reserves. Development charges help us fund another $38 million. And so what the city actually has to borrow for, what they have to actually issue debt for, is about $220 million, and that's over a 10-year period. So you're looking at around $22 million a year. The city also, like I said before, has targets that we have to meet. So you can imagine that we're competing with TTC, we're competing with Parks and Rec, we're competing with a number of other important city services, right? And so they establish targets for each one of those entities, and we've met our capital target on average over the 10 years, and we're actually met each year in the first 5 years of the program. This chart just shows where the money goes, and you can see information technology and bricks and mortar are where 75% of where our money goes. Now, it's a 10-year program that we look at every year, and I can really see that there's going to be probably more money on the information technology side and probably less money on the bricks and mortar side. I can see that shift. It's already started to happen. And that, in fact, supports what the Way Forward report says, where we should be investing in technology to create efficiencies and provide information to our people and consolidate and reduce our facilities footprint by consolidating and using other facilities to meet our service requirements. Parking enforcement. Parking enforcement is not part of the TPS budget. It's actually part of the city budget, which includes parking tag operations revenue, as well as the prosecution side. So we're part of a larger pot. Happy to report that parking almost came in at zero. They were 39,000. I'm sure we'll find that somewhere. So they basically have also met the 0% target that the city set. And now I'm going to turn it over to Joanne Campbell to go over the board budget. Before I do want to thank Cindy Grant and her team for putting this presentation together, and the website, as well as Ian from BI and Corpcom and the webmaster from Mark Pugash's area. They've done a really great job under very, very tight timelines. So thank you to all of you. Okay, Joanne.
So the Police Services Board presents several budgets to City Council for approval. The Police Services Board budget, the Parking Enforcement budget, and the Police Services Act requires that the board budget separately for its own costs and expenses. So for that reason, the board budget appears completely separately. This budget includes salary for the board staff, remuneration for the chair and for the appointed members to the board. It includes funds for the day-to-day operation of the board's office, expenses related to meetings of the board, its committees, and its advisory bodies. And it also includes funds for labor relations related legal costs and a chargeback for the services which are provided to both the board and the service by the City of Toronto's Legal Services Division. So our budget is $2.3 million. We've achieved the city's zero target, and we've largely done that by carving what in our case are quite small amounts from various administrative accounts. And that is our little budget in comparison to the billion-dollar budget. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you. So for questions, I'm going to suggest that we go to the citizens first for questions, and then if board members have any questions, we'll field those tonight as well. The presentation that you've just seen is going to be going on the website, I think, sometime this week. Yeah. So which is the simplified version of the budget. When we get to the October 5th and October 26th, there'll be a little more detail, but this presentation will be available within the week in any case. But I'm going to field questions just on your first look at it, and I saw both gentlemen writing at various points. So I'm going to suggest we take turns. There may be some duplication, but we have a small enough audience that I think we can manage that. We have people, if you want to get into specialty areas, to answer all of the more detailed questions. But remember that if the presentation hasn't provided you with enough detail, there will be further opportunity for engagement in those later meetings. So I'm wondering, Chris, you look like you have your notes already. Did you want to go first, or Miguel, are you ready?
Almost there. Go for it if you want. Okay.
Yeah.
For everybody, this is a copy of yesterday's municipal license and standards, item 21.2.
Oh, yes.
21.2. I'm going to take you to page number 5. Probably you can find it through your assistant over there. You can get the same report. On bullet point number 2, it says, some recommendations from City Council to Ontario Province. It says, because the province worked with the city and the Toronto Police Service to develop appropriate enforcement strategies, including provincially funded and provided enforcement to support efforts to eliminate illegal cannabis sales. So the city is taking the proactive step to ask the province on their magic legislation to provide them with funds. In your chart, it says that we will achieve the 0%. What happens if the Liberals don't get elected next year, which looks like, and the Conservatives get on? I'm sure they're not going to be supporting these changes, and we are going to be duped. That is my question to you: is do you have a plan B, such as political party changes in Ontario in 2018? That's very important to recognize.
So for tonight, I'm assuming we're going to have reports to the board on, now that we know what the model is. But for tonight, your question is really Plan A and Plan B in relation to the budget. Am I right?
Yes.
Are we preparing for both a Plan A and a Plan B?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chief Saunders, are you prepared to have somebody answer that? Within the budget, are we preparing for the impact on the police services for the cannabis startup? Mm-hmm.
I believe the narrative is that both levels of government are looking at funding police resources when it comes to the training awareness and public awareness with the discussion on legalizing marijuana.
Okay.
So that covers us for 2018?
2018, yes.
Yes.
Oh, no, I have a question, but maybe Chris can go ahead.
Are you ready to go, Chris?
Sure.
Okay.
Are we on? Not really. Okay, well, I can just sit and talk then. I mean, that's much more comfortable. So I mentioned a few points on the capital budget. I was speaking to Cindy earlier. Some of the acronyms here in the budget, I don't necessarily know what they are, so it'd be helpful if we had those breakdowns. I noticed there's a lot of numbers put together for video-related items, whether it's body-worn cameras, in-car cameras, digital photography, small equipment for video recording, and a subsequent below-the-line request for body-worn cameras. And so those total up to, for the total 10-year budget, $36 million combined. And I'll give you copies of what I've got here so you can look at it after the fact. But so I'm just wondering, that seems like a big number out of this, what have we got here? Total gross projects, $800 million over 10 years, and that's 36 million of that is just related to video and camera. And so I guess it's hard to say what the specific question is, other than that that's a large number, and so how is that sort of being brought together to be handled consistently and considered so that we're getting the most efficient bang for the buck there with all these different services. I know with body-worn cameras we've talked about looking at cloud storage of data, and that was one of the things that you were going to look at here going forward, and yet we've got down here the DVAM project, which I assume is digital video asset management, and I suspect relates to that, and that's $8 million at the end of over the 10 years. So I'm not sure that that's all been brought in here, and is that just something that's probably going to evolve next year's budget, and that this is where we think we're at now for 10 years based on...
So I'll start with your body-worn camera question first. So what we had in our budget was about $500,000 to actually allow us to do our due diligence around body-worn cameras. You'll remember we did a pilot project, and I think that the public as well as our officers were pretty favorable and positive with respect to that. But we really need to know how much it's going to cost, both from a total cost of ownership. The fact that we can move forward now, we now have the ability to look at cloud solutions, which we didn't have when we started the project before. So that's $500,000 that's in our budget. If we decide to go forward, then we would populate that budget, go to the board and the city for approval, and it'll be a lot more than $500,000 at that point. So that's below the line. The RFP that we're going to be doing is a non-binding RFP, again, to protect us. To ensure that if we decide not to go forward, there won't be any legal ramifications against us. So that's body-worn. The other things that you mentioned, Chris, were all things that are basically covered by the reserve portion of our capital program. So when you talk about $36 million, in-car camera, that's a risk management accountability tool that we put in all our police vehicles. I bet you in that 10-year period, we probably replaced those in-car cameras because their life is about 4 to 5 years, probably twice over that period of time. What we've done, though, to mitigate and keep some of those costs to an absolute minimum is we've actually stretched the life cycle of a lot of our equipment. So printers that used to be 4 years are now almost 6 years. Workstations that used to be 3 years are now 4 years. Our radios, which is part of a capital project, and it's a big one, it's about $40 million. The manufacturer basically said you should replace those radios every 6 to 7 years. We keep them for 10 years. So I think what we've done is, we've been pretty diligent in terms of analyzing, looking at our needs, and then making decisions and funding our program based on what we've reduced a lot of money in that area. Now, I know it sounds like a lot of money, but like I said, there's a lot of equipment that we use to support our operations. DVAMs is a key part of our operation, right? And so that's basically what we've done. So I want to assure you and others that, yeah, we look at that very carefully every year.
Okay. And with that...
So is that enough of an answer, or are you looking for a breakdown of it later on in the budget process?
I'm always interested in more breakdown, but that answers most of my question. You did just raise another question with your response in terms of the $500,000 for body-worn cameras that was approved by the board as an expenditure. I haven't heard any more about what's happened with that. And I think that was April that got approved or so for within the next year or so.
So again, that project is moving forward. We're bringing the expertise that we need to the table from a procurement perspective, from a legal perspective, from a fairness commissioner perspective, because it is going to be, and in other jurisdictions it's been pretty controversial sometimes in terms of the end decision. So we want to make sure that we do it right, that we bring the right people to the table. We don't want to do this in sort of in haste. We want to do it the right way. And that's why we basically said we're going to need about $500,000 to do that. That project is well underway, and certainly we'll update it as part of our capital variance process in terms of where we're going with it.
In the recent
Yeah.
capital variance, none of that money has shown up as having been spent.
We've spent some, but again, we're still not to the point where and if we don't have to spend 500, we're not going to spend 500. So, I mean, we're trying to do, we thought that's what it might be, but again, we're going to look at and only spend where we need to spend to ensure that the project moves forward the right way.
And then I've got
More questions?
operating budget
Sure.
questions. Line 11, I'm looking here at the line-by-line numbers. So line 11 is statutory holidays, and that's showing a 15% increase over 2017 actual, 20% increase over 2017 budget, and yet that's during a period when we've had reductions here in staffing levels. And so I'm wondering why statutory holiday pay would be going up 20% when actual staffing levels are going down. That seems contradictory to me. So I can give you all these, and if you want to answer these for the next budget meeting, that's fine.
That'd be great. And actually, if you give us the questions, we'll actually post the questions and the answers online if we
So
can.
I'll go through them and then I'll give you my
Yep.
answers so you know my notes.
Did you write that one down, Chris, or should we? Oh, okay. So we'll grab it from you at the end. Okay.
So also dealing with photographic supplies, so lines 46 and 47 deal with photographic supplies and photo in-house. And those are going up 13, 14% roughly in the budget over actuals. And I'm wondering why I would have instinctively thought those numbers would go down as a result of digital photography nowadays, and that costs for processing would have presumably gone down. So I was
Sure, Chris, I don't have the absolute increase. What's the absolute dollar increase there?
Total of 25,000. Sorry, is this thousands or millions?
No, it can't be millions.
That would, okay, that's millions.
Lines 46 and 47.
Yes. Yeah, that's thousands in this case. Uniforms went up 1.4% over actual and 11% over budget from 2017. I'm wondering why uniforms went up when there was actually a hiring freeze on. So that's line 6.
We're actually hiring in 2018, so
Okay,
we need
so
to
that's-
put our answers.
That also includes that. I've asked that. The only reason I'm interjecting is I've asked that question myself. While there's a hiring freeze, you sometimes see the blip in uniforms because while there's a freeze, there may be a replacement of retired officers to the point where, especially now, because so many people are retiring at baby boomer age. So while there's a hiring freeze, we see the complement going down. We may actually bring in 200 new people who need new uniforms if those are the retirees.
Okay.
Yeah.
That actually, the uniforms, that increase is actually related to a new vest that was required.
Oh, that's for
hold up
our
Yeah, that was,
public
you're,
works.
you're
So
talking
it's
about
that plus the uniform hires.
the uniform.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Bargaining expenses, you had 0 in 2014 and 150,000 in 2015. I'm just wondering what it is that's what the contract's being bargained in 2018 that you thought you needed 150,000
I
related.
think we started the process I think we started the process in 14, but continued into 15. But now, are you asking the question about 18?
Well, yeah, in 17 there was the budget and year-to-date and projected actual was zeros. across
So
the
we're
board.
starting
It's
we're actually starting the process next year.
So this is for
the contract
the next-
expires at the end of next year.
Okay. Line 91, PEU, which I assume is parking enforcement unit, towing charges, And it's a small amount, it's only $5,000, but I would have thought all towing charges were billed back to the vehicle owner, so I'm just curious what.
We'll get you the answer.
And as well, there's a 64% increase, a $71,000 increase in investigative expenses, line 104. Just curious why a large increase in that. So again, something to look at. And line 124, contractor services for renovations, and it was almost 400,000 in 2016, went down to 31,000 in 2017, and then we're now back up to a budget of 356,000. So are you just expecting a lot more renovations this year?
Part of that, some of that might actually be to support the Way Forward report in terms of small renovations that we're going to be doing. So we only budget to what we need. So in 17, we had some vacancies and capacity issues, but 18, we're certainly planning to support the initiatives.
And that ties in with line 135, maintenance expenses. They're up 8% budget over 2017. I would have thought with the proposed amalgamation that they would have started going down. Is that just the amalgamation?
What account?
This is, that's computer maintenance. Sorry.
So that was about, what, a $1.6 million increase? 1.4.
Yeah, 1.4.
So that is a function of the increase in the equipment and the software and the licenses as we move forward, and that's based on contracts that we sign to support our various systems.
But then those tie back into the capital report that we see on a quarterly basis, the capital?
No, that's on the operating side. That's the capital would be the investment that we make in the system.
Yeah.
That is the dollars that we spend year over year to actually support the system.
Okay. I noticed in one of the slides that you had there for the breakdown on the reserve, and I had mentioned that it would be nice to have more of a breakdown in the reserve. That wasn't what was on the line available the last time I looked. I think it with these slides may be there now, and so it may be
we're going to put
future. So I'd love to see more detailed breakdown on the reserves, what the balances are, and what the assumption is of how that's going to go out. And that ties into line 150, which is the insurance reserve at just under 11 million. And so,
so that one there, Chris,
yeah.
the city actually does the insurance on our behalf as well as for other city divisions. So they basically look at the whole program and then allocate based on risk and based on other factors. So they basically tell us what that number is going to be, and then we put it in our budget.
And that's something that I think long-term, that ties back to when there are issues with policing. You can all think of various situations where that certainly affects how that number goes up or down over time. And so that's something where I think it'd be helpful to have a long-term report where we can see how that number is changing year over year, and trying to tie that back to what's going on in terms of previous situations with policing and issues and legal matters that have come up over time.
Yep.
So any kind of breakdown that we can give on.
I don't know if we can give a breakdown on that, but certainly we can get some information for the city in terms of how they develop and get some information that way.
I have tried doing it with the city. Sorry, Chris. I have tried doing it with the city, and they had sent me to another court to find out that information, to the Untitled Superior, to get the details of that disclosure settlement or whatever information. That information is not public.
Well, that's
I
just,
think we need to have that information public. So for you to tell me, go to the city, it's not going to happen.
No, he said he can.
Oh, he can have it.
we won't give you information on settlements
I would
that.
really like to know who will give you that information. Last time that kicked around.
Are you talking about actual awards, actual settlement awards?
Yes, out of court, whatever the lawyer.
Right, but often the settlement is based on both sides swearing on a stack of Bibles that they will never divulge the
The
amount.
taxpayer pays for those insurance fees, the taxpayers are the ones who needs to know In light of this way forward accountability, transparency, and whatever you want to name it, I think taxpayers have the obligation to be aware of this.
So there is a conversation that can happen in the city's budget process. We often field that question. And there is an answer for why those amounts are protected that will be given in the budget process there, because that question gets asked almost every year. But I'm going to endeavor to see if it's anywhere in writing so that we can include it here as well, because I've had it answered a number of times. But there are statutes that allow for that privacy in unique situations and legislation laid out. But I have a feeling that we have had a written briefing note on it within the city's budget process. So I'm looking at my executive assistant to see if we can dig that up for you.
Oh, I would
Yeah,
like to
we
see
have
that.
had that, yeah.
So I think that's the issue where we can't maybe see what the individual awards and individual cases were because that's private, but maybe the service can get some breakdown from the city on how at least the insurance premiums are affected, so we can see big picture how things are going, maybe not knowing on a case-by-case basis by claims how that's affecting this number. But every information.
Remember, we're part of the whole city umbrella, so even other areas, we could affect other areas, and other areas could affect us.
So they don't divvy it out, or they don't necessarily track a breakdown?
No, I'm sure they do, but I'm just saying that they have certain criteria, and actually they use some algorithms to actually decide what our portion is going to be.
Okay.
So we'll get some information on that.
Excellent. And I guess any information then that you can get as to how those algorithms, what they're considering when they come up with this allocation, just so that I don't have to ask you how they came up with that number. And then looking at line 151, reserve contributions, and you've gone from 30 million for the 2017 budget to 36 million, 21.2% increase. And so I'm wondering what justifies the 21% increase in reserves. Obviously, it's always nice to have more money in the savings account.
Oh, actually, it is nice, but it's actually, we have had to defer the contributions that we need to make to those reserves in order to meet certain city targets and board targets. And so this year, I could not, in my position, continue to defer that obligation to future service members, right? So we've decided that we need to start putting that amount of money that we need in our base. So it's not a nice to have, it's actually what we need in our base to actually meet our obligations. So that's, and you're right, it is a $6 million increase over 2017, I think.
So I guess that's where having some kind of idea of what the balances in the reserve are and what the projected uses of those numbers are. And I know that's difficult to come up with from a budget point of view a lot of times, but anything we can would certainly be helpful and appreciated. And then the last item is below the total line here, you've got human resources transformation. And you come up with a $2.8 million figure, and it just happens to work out that that number, when included with the salary settlement and the crossing and lifeguards values, helps to make the budget work out to 0%. And so it seems, as an ex-accounting guy, like the plug number. That's the number that, well, that was where we were at for 2018, subtracted from what the 2017 budget was, and that this was the answer. And so I'm curious what the breakdown or what the proposed use of this 2.8 million is for HR.
So first of all, it's not the plug. We actually spent a lot of time coming up with that number. And what it is basically, if you remember in the Way Forward report, the report talked about cost savings and cost containment. They also talked about investments that are going to have to be required, that are going to need to be made. And this is a very good example of an investment that we're going to have to make into our HR function to ensure that they have the people and the right positions to be able to support the various initiatives of the TTF. A lot of those initiatives, you see our budget is people, and so it's really important that we have a group of function that can actually support the various initiatives as they go forward. And that is the investment that we have to make.
So with the number of staff actually going down over time, it seems surprising that there's a $2.8 million investment required. In addition to, there was, over the last 2 years, there was a capital expenditure for a number of projects related to HR, the time management system, and a couple of others. So I'm assuming that these aren't software related or sort of things of that nature. And so I guess then it seems surprising that there's $2.8 million in, is that new staff then being hired?
No, what it is that because of the moratorium, we didn't fill a number of positions. And so now, in order to move the HR, there's no point reorganizing HR, developing new positions, and then not filling those positions. This allows us to fill those positions so we can actually move the organization forward in a number of different issues. So you're right. I mean, if we were actually budgeting for those positions in 17, then you're right. It would be it might be an incremental because some positions might be more or less expensive than the others. But this is really to fill positions that are currently vacant.
So note that can be one of the issues that we can note on the website.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most of those issues you provided answers to, and so if those can be sort of summarized somewhere in there, but that's great. Sure. Thank you.
Okay, Miguel, you had a couple of extra questions. Yes.
I do. This has to do with the announcement that Mr. John Tory made yesterday in relation to the strategic plan to alleviate the chaos in the city of Toronto. I am surprised that he has been advised by the province that Section 34 of the Ontario Highway Act, the changes that City Council has requested in 2006 will happen. Do you know if the province will agree with all the requests that the Police Services Board and the City Council Budget Committee agreed to reduce the number of positions for pay duty? I'm curious if the pay duty will continue or will be lesser, and how this traffic warning will affect the budget overall.
Because that announcement was just made yesterday, I don't think we have any documentation on it necessarily yet. Yeah. The sit-down meeting on that has not happened yet. Yeah. Well, you may be, well, it may be paid duty expenditures. They may be being paid for by a city division, such as transportation, which may be why that announcement can happen and without a briefing with the chief, because those are on demand. You request paid duty and you get paid duty, but they're off-duty officers. So if that's being funded in transportation, then a briefing with Chief Saunders could conceivably have not happened yet, and as we're learning tonight, has not happened yet. But that was an announcement just made yesterday, so I would expect that it will be that discussion will happen.
Yeah, and also I had this long time question I wanted to ask. Maybe some of the old staff members can come up with that information. Where does the magic number of 5,618 uniform officers come from? Who came up with that number? According to the chart, it says 2004 or 5. It goes back to those years. Who came up with that number? Is according to the population increase? How many police officers?
Yes, the age-old question for both uniform and civilian staff. How is that complement arrived at?
My McCormick is crying, saying that we are going to be run over by crime. So.
Well, that's as may be, but we'll get you the answer to where the complement number comes from.
I'll just do the math for you. In terms of where the 5,600, and remember, we haven't been at 5,600 for a long time.
Yeah.
Basically, we were at around 5,100 in 2005, and then there was 2 grants that the province gave us to basically subsidize about 500 officers. And that's how we got from 5,100. And if you remember, 2005 or 6 was the year of the gun. And so the province basically gave us funding for about 500 officers. So that's how it got up to 5,600. That's not to say the 5,600 is the right number, but that's how we got there.
But I think, am I right? Miguel, your question is who comes up with the number? Where'd the 5,100 come from? Not how does it change, where does it come from in the first place? Since the dawn of time, where did the number come from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go back to the
Yeah.
years, yeah. Does it justify, does it really justify or not?
The methodology used in the past to determine the number was called a demand factor, and that dealt with a lot of moving parts. What's going on today is with technology, we've been able to be more analytical with our resources. What is required, when is it required, who's required to use it, how often is it being used, or are we called to be used upon? And then from that, we are able to determine the resources that are necessary. The resources don't necessarily have to be a uniform. They can be civilianized, or they can be pushed over to other agencies such as City Hall, which is what the modernization piece is discussed.
Okay, but I still think what Miguel is asking is who's we? We get all the factors, but who is the we that approves so that we can use the phrase approved complement? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I think that's what you were asking.
I'm
I'm sorry to paraphrase for you, but I'm pretty sure that's what you're asking. When we say approved complement, who's the approval?
Board.
Just the board and no one else?
There was an argument once at the City Council, but I don't think that argument, I think it's the board.
It's the board. So it has nothing to do with the Ministry of the Attorney General, according to urban legend. That is an urban myth.
Well, I guess there were the two increases.
Right, increases, but the
province
base
said.
number, where we originally got to 5,000, that really is, that's a board approval that we have built upon and given and taken, et cetera. Okay, got it.
Well, it's nice to know. I know what to do.
I have one more question.
Miguel, were you done?
Yes, I am very much satisfied with my other questions today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chris, you had one more.
The one other thing that was brought up there in your presentation, Mr. Vincent, is the issue of civilian positions and court officers and mechanics, and you mentioned a couple of others. Is it possible to come up with in future budgets a breakdown of just what those 4 or 5 categories are, just so that when we're looking at these numbers, it sure makes some sense? Thank you.
Excellent. That was going to be one of my questions. Can we get that? Because that was great messaging. Most people think civilians are all just administrative clerks. Yeah.
We're saving that for the October 5th.
Then I think I'll come. I think I'm coming to that one then. My fellow members, did you have any questions or any further fleshing out you want time for future meetings? Miss Mulliner.
So this is not a request to have further meetings on this, because I want to just make an observation that this is a rite of passage. You have actually, your team, Chief Saunders, made the budget boring and more understandable than it's ever been before. And I have to say, it's been 5 years that I've been trying to make it more accessible. I think we've made significant progress. I have a whole other vision of how we could explain this even more transparently, but what has been accomplished today is significant. The fact that there are only 2 people who have made excellent contributions does not reflect the significance of the work that's been done, and I'm really impressed with the kind of work that the team has put together here. So thank you, everyone. I look around the room, I see how many people have worked a long day today, so thank you very much.
I still have one question, and actually, in a way, it started its life as Marie's question, but I think it's something that we have to wrap our heads around this year, because I think it's going to become really important next year. And that was the dream of setting up sort of ground level descriptions. And I understand the hesitancy with breaking the budget out into this is how much Division 14 costs, and this is how much 51 costs. That gets into a mug's game, and that I understand. But I still think that the last step in accessibility is if we can get to, even if they were hypotheticals, if it was Division Purple on fictitious street and centralized command fictitious scenario, so that we can start to get at how when you break down some of these lines where things are just in 7 summarized lines, it's a bit frustrating. But if you break out the massive line that is services and rents, what you get at is the reason we're going through transformation is if you want to set up one division, there's this much in rents or the maintenance on ownership. There's this base amount of human resource just to be able to unlock the door. Then you layer on top of that whatever is going on in that community before you decide how to staff that one. That how you build a division and how you build a centralized command such as traffic services or homicide, we're still not quite describing that. And I think part of the thing is you don't want to talk about the real divisions and then have communities saying, why does this one cost? It would be somewhat like at City Council when people say, why does it cost that much in Scarborough and it costs more in North York, and having to constantly pit things against each other. But I still think the last piece in accessibility is if we did it even with theoretical settings to show people this is what it takes to build a police division. And that's why we are currently questioning in the way forward who decided 17. And I think if we unfold that a little in the budget process, when we get to that day where we're going to have to announce that we've decided a different number than 17, there'll be a base knowledge out there in the community. I don't know if it's possible to do that within this budget year, but we definitely need to do it before we're having the big community conversation about the really big moves. Is it possible to begin to draft that this year during our financial discussions this year?
So I don't think we can do it this year. There's just too much to do and a lot of work. But the actual budget does break down a division, so you can actually see what 14 division costs, and it's broken down. Now you're saying maybe we should get more detail, but it actually shows that a division really it's all people, and they maybe have about $100,000 to $150,000 in discretionary expenses. So there's not a lot of non-people. But the thing that we really want to get to is program budgeting. We want to get to a point where, and I think the way we're going to be structured in the future will probably facilitate that a bit. In other words, what are we spending in terms of community programs and to engage the community? Where are we spending to respond to calls? What are we spending to investigate crime? What's our administrative support ratio? It's that type of thing that we want to do. It's just getting to it because it seems like we're always in a budget process. And so finding the time or the resource to be able to do that. But that's something that we want to move towards. I think right now it's probably premature to look at divisions because we are moving to a district model, which will change all of that. And so I think at some point we need to, but I think that, and again, part of that whole process should be to address some of the concerns or some of the things that Councillor, you were talking about. So that's where we want to go.
So maybe it's less a budget function. I keep thinking of it in the context of transformation because we're going to need a lot of really good communication pieces. How we message. Maybe it's an Office of Transformation conversation more than a budget confirmation or conversation. I think to get to the big moves that will affect the 2019 and 2020 budget, we just need this communication piece that needs to be neutral enough for us to have the conversation without losing our minds. I know that the Office of Transformation and all the deputy chiefs know what I'm talking about. We're going to have those difficult conversations. Drawing this up, maybe it's less budget and more just purely transformation, but it will help us explain why we're moving to the different model, not just financially, but you know, or service and organizationally. It will make more sense, I think, why you would make that move. Yeah. Okay. So I'm parking it for budget and maybe taking it to another office. Greatly relieving Chief Saunders. Okay, so I'll just remind people quickly before adjourning this info session that the presentation you saw tonight will show up on the website in short order. Give us a few days. The questions may take a few more days, but people have been making notes, and so those added bits of detail will be included on the website in short order as well. And as you know, the first actual budget meeting with that bit more detail and the announcement of it will happen in advance of October 5th. October 5th, 1 p.m. is the first formal budget committee meeting, and in this room, not upstairs, further to Ms. Molliner's comments. And on that note, yes, Miguel?
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes.
I think what is a big deterrent is for the public to go through all the search and disclose your pockets. What do we do at City Hall when there's no that paranoia of people are going to come and hurt me here?
Well,
what do we do at City Hall?
My comment, and this is an editorial comment as chair, my comment is I'm very excited about Justice Tulloch's recommendation that we continue to have the business of police here, but perhaps boards should meet outside of headquarters when they're having their public meetings. That being said, the security you see downstairs, according to emergency preparedness and all of the review that's going on across the city, you will very soon be seeing at civic centers as well. That is modern times.
That's the state police.
We haven't budgeted for it yet, but in fact, I don't want to get into an open debate, but I'm not as upset as some might be that we're going to have to do the same thing at City Hall, because I can walk a few short steps over to Osgood Hall, and for many years I've been having to go through what you go through downstairs now. When I visit good friends that I have who sit on council at New York City Hall, I can't go to the building unless I have an appointment. I can't just walk in. When I get there, if I drive there, I have to make an arrangement to have my car scanned, and then I go through a screen and a metal detector, and then I go to the elevator. When I get off the elevator, I go through another screen and a metal detector, and none of this can happen without long in advance appointments. So we're not going that far, but quite frankly, the Toronto Police Service is only unique in that they got it done sooner than other public institutions that have been asked to do it.
Can I say, I don't want to be searched. Can I stop? Can I have to the officer downstairs? I don't want to be searched. I come every year here. Come on. 6 years I'm coming.
Well, it's not a budget matter. That's not a budget matter. It's not a budget matter. And you, as an expert citizen, know where to take that complaint. If not, call me and we'll talk about where that should be discussed. And that being said, there will be throughout the next year meetings happening in all sorts of locations. This one is adjourned, and the next one is in this room on October 5th. Thank you.